So welcome everybody to the session. So leading change in an uncertain world. My name is Jo Bracey. I am head of capability at Sysdoc, and my background, which I hate to say, is that I've been a change manager for at least 20 years, but we'd like to forget about that. And I'll pretend it's only 5. So as part of the session, we're going to be sharing insights and practical approaches to understanding and tackling the increasingly challenging task of implementing successful change in an ever more complex and uncertain world. So just to let you all know, we are recording the session, so I hope that's okay with everybody. Right, so what do we want to get out of the session? So we want some outcomes from the session. So hopefully by the end of the session, we'll all get a sense of perspective. So are the change challenges that you're facing unique to your organisation, or are they not? I've just got to say that I attended a session the other day on change, and it was actually really refreshing to hear that a lot of the challenges that we are facing are universal. So it's not just us that are facing them. We'd like to understand the different influencing factors that need to be considered for change planning in the current environment. And as we all know, it's an incredibly and increasingly volatile environment out there at the minute. Explore what this additional uncertainty means for leaders of change and the approach that we need to take, taking into account this uncertainty, and how to think about internal culture during these complex times of significant change. So the format of the session, the lovely Jennifer, who's in my top left corner, but maybe not for you, will be doing a keynote talk for us, followed by a Q&A. So if you've got any questions, do send them over to us, and I'll explain how to do that in a second. We're then going to open up to our panel, and so we can carry on the discussions on the topic. And I'll introduce the panel to you after Jennifer. So the poll, Danny, the lovely Danny has created a Menti poll, which I believe will be posted in the chat. So if you just scan that, yeah, there we go. It's in the chat now, and there's a link to it as well if you don't want to do that on your phone. So if you just scan the QR codes, you can do the Menti poll. So if you go onto your phone, you can do the Menti poll, answer that, and then as you scroll through, there's an option to submit questions to the panel or to Jennifer. If you want to ask questions, please do put them in the chat or on the Menti if you'd rather be anonymous, or use that medium. So I think that's it for logistics. So I think we are now over to Jennifer. So Jennifer has worked with us at Sysdoc and is a practicing change consultant and published author. Jennifer has worked with over 30 different organisations across multiple industries, so is definitely an authority on the topic. So over to you, Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Jo. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me, Sysdoc. And it's fantastic to see you guys. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and thoughts at the end of this. I'm going to chat for about 25 minutes, and then we'll be taking questions at that point. So to begin with, in building resilience in a changing environment, silence. Silence is loud when leading change. Have you ever asked someone a question and they haven't answered you? Not because they haven't heard you or they haven't seen your question. The response they are giving you speaks volumes in leading change. Because if it's one thing I've learned in working for over 20 years with nearly 40 different organizations now, it's that change is about people, not rocket science. Now, that is a little bit of a double-edged sword because it's not to say that change is simple. It's just that sometimes we make it a little bit more complicated than it really needs to be. It's also not to say that people are simple because A plus B does not necessarily equal C when it comes to people, like it does with rocket science. Businesses tend to focus on the tasks when it comes to change, thinking of the project plans, the communication, the training plans, the things that need to get done. And that worked well in a time when things were a bit more reliable. We had a reasonable idea of what might be coming down the line and what the future hold. And things were a bit more, or at least they felt a little bit more relatively more certain. But that's not really the case nowadays. The future is a bit more like this picture. It's moving and it's fast, but it's a bit rocky. And we can see into the future, but we can't necessarily see clearly around the corner. So, when I was working with one organization a few years ago on a digital transformation project, I was brought in when the program had been going on for 9 months. And it was that strategy week when they brought all the project leaders in from around the globe, and they were looking at what they did that year, what went well, what didn't go so well, what they're trying to do next year. And for a couple of days, I sat there and I listened, and I sat there and went, this all sounds great, but why should I care about this? And what does it do? And they sat there and they thought, well, it does this. And they're spouting out the efficiencies and effectiveness, what I would call the management spiel from it all. And I go, yeah, but what about me as a project manager in this organization, or Maria in Brazil, or Lynn in Hong Kong, or Sam in Norwich? What's the point? What's the purpose for them? What is this all about? Why should they care? What's the so what in it for them? And that's when the penny really dropped. They hadn't really communicated the people side of things, which is why so many of their complaints is that people weren't adopting and taking on board all the new, whizzy, fabulous things that they were doing because they didn't really know about it, didn't really understand it. There is a McKinsey report that states that in 1958, the typical lifespan of an organization was 60 years when it was listed on the S&P. But now that's 12 years. It also states that by 2027, 75% of the organizations that are currently listed on the S&P are no longer going to exist. They're either going to get merged or bought out or quite simply go bankrupt. Now, that's quite a startling statistic to me because that means organizations have got to change and adapt or they're going to die. On top of that, there is a huge technology disruptor going on, which is no big new news to us. And it's taking a look at what it is that's happening and what's going on and how is it going. And it's happening and going at a faster and faster and faster rate. But what's really interesting is that many times we want it to go even faster than what it's actually doing. Our desires for the technology and wanting to absorb a lot of these things is greater than it's ever been. And that has a big impact on our personal lives and our professional lives. I mean, can you imagine if we had had to go through lockdowns like we did without technology? How would we have worked? How would we have connected? How would we have socialized? How would we have done any of the things that we did? It would have been a very different lockdown situation entirely. On top of that, there are the UN sustainability goals. And organizations are looking at how are they going to apply these goals, not just within their organizations, but from a supply chain arena, from a business to business perspective, business to customer perspective. And on top of that, we're looking at it from an employee and individual perspective. And a lot of us may be already doing a lot of great things, but we're thinking, how can we make it better? This is one of the big topics and one of the big disruptors that's going on in our world right now. And we're going, what can we do about this? So here we are in a space where we are taking a look and starting to review things because it might have been in the industrial age, a more directive leadership style was needed for a health and safety perspective, but also that was people's expectations as well. But now we're in a digital and information age, and our expectations are enormously different. We're thinking about what do we want? How do we want it? Where do we want it? How do we want to live? Where do we want to live? How do we want to work? Do we want to be fully remote? Do we want to be hybrid? Do we want to be completely in the office? And where do we want that to be? And do we have the ability to make all of that happen? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So when it comes to leading change, it can feel really bewildering during all this uncertainty and complexity. Also, to try and support people to take business to the next level can feel really quite daunting. And as a result, there's a lot of leaders from my experience that feel that people don't like change. But I disagree with them because we're dealing with it all the time. Look at the change that's going on right now. We had Boris Johnson this morning, we don't this afternoon. Change. And that has a big impact on us. So to me, it's not that people don't like change, it's that people don't like being changed. And just to illustrate that point, I was working for an organization. I was actually an employee of this organization at the time. And we were moving offices. The office we were currently in was old, dirty, grungy, dark. It was gross. And the new office was bright, it was shiny, it was really light, everything was new, it smelled new, it was colorful, really fabulous. And we were very excited to be moving into this new office. But then 2 weeks before we moved, so we're already starting to pack stuff because I was in HR and there's a lot of paperwork, and we're packing our things up. But 2 weeks before we're moving, we get told we are not going to have allocated desks. And not only that, there's not going to be enough desks for everybody on the team. We're like, how's that going to work? We don't have laptops, we have desktops. We don't, we're not mobile. We have to come in and do our work here or we don't get it done. And that totally took a different color, different perspective, but gave us a different taste in our mouth in regards to the change. And to the point that there were some people who were still complaining about it 3 years later, even though we were in this much better environment and it did all work. But because people weren't taken along the journey, they continued to complain about it. So, how do we create sustainable change? This is a matrix that I've created, and it's based on the level of activity versus the level of engagement. And what it states here is if we've got a low level of activity and a low level of engagement, then we end up being a bit like this solo candle here, where what we're doing, as soon as we start to whittle down the wick, the light goes out and it's gone, and it's as if it was never there. Whereas if we have high level activity and low level engagement, we've got a lot of lights going on, a lot of things happening, but no one's engaged with it. So once again, as soon as the light starts to go down the wick and disappears, and one by one, poof, 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 they go out. The other side of the equation, if we've got low activity and high engagement, then everybody's really excited and they're ready to they are engaged, they're ready to get doing things, but there's nothing for them to do. And as a result, we're in a situation where staff start to feel really demotivated and demoralized and bored. They're going, when are we going to start doing something about this? We're ready to go. So to create that sustainable change, it's very much about creating a high level of activity with a high level engagement. That way we've got lots going on, everybody's on board, and as a result, we're all going down the same path and are able to make the change last and impactful and valued and feel good about it. A lot of people have heard the analogy that change is a story or a journey. But the big question that I ask is what story do you want to share? And how do you want to travel? And I use the word share very specifically because change is not a one man band activity. Two, how do you want to travel? Do you want to travel with everyone next to you and you're all skipping down the yellow brick road together? Or are you 20 paces ahead and are working on making sure everybody's coming along behind you and not getting 40 paces behind, but are staying to the 20 paces? It's up to you. So, when it comes to building the resilience, there are three things that you need to actually do to create and build that muscle within individuals and organizations. The first is visioning. And I don't mean just visioning for now, I mean in the future, in 10 years down the line. And you need to think about what it is that you want as an organization. How do you want to be thought of? How do you want people to feel about you? How do you want to be perceived? How do you want your clients to perceive you? How do you want to feel about working there? How do you want your staff to feel? How do you want to be perceived within the industry? Thinking about that in 10 years down the line enables you to build the flexibility so that you can actually cope with the uncertainty and complexity that's going on. Whereas if you're constantly looking at what's going on right in front of you, then guess what you have to do as soon as you get there? You have to then do it again because there's the next one, and then the next one, and you're constantly starting over. So building it 10 years down the line starts to create that muscle of flexibility and taking a look at dealing with the complexities and what is going to come down the line. Two, about using a holistic approach to the change. And what I mean by that, it's looking at the influencing factors of the change internally and externally. And they will influence because they will influence the change possibly directly or indirectly. And we need to go through that analysis, followed by then the A/B change model for our leading aspects of it, which then builds out our tasks and actions. So, what are those external factors? Politics. It's a good one for today, isn't it? So, we need to actually take a look at the politics of what's going on externally because us changing leadership as a country will have an impact. The Ukraine war had a very big impact on a lot of organizations because we had to look at how are we going to get a lot of our people out of Russia or Ukraine and so forth. That was a big thing that was going on for a lot of us at the beginning of the year. Economic fluctuations and what's happening now. We're in a situation where inflation is very much on the rise. Energy crisis is going on. That's having a huge impact on how people are feeling and as a result, how they feel about the organizations that they work for and their consumer elements and the organizations in which they have to interact with. I don't think BA is very many people's friends right now in the consumer world, for example. Then there's the societal norms. Blah, blah, blah. And it's very much about looking at what it is that we want and our perceptions, how we want things. That is changing and how we're looking to do things. Hashtag Me Too movement. Enough is enough. All of these different elements have big impacts. We've talked a lot about the technologies, but now it's looking at the technologies in a more detailed level. What is coming down the line? We all know if it's not already in play, VR is going to have an impact on our organizations. We also know most likely facial scanning is going to have an impact because A, people want to touch things less, and B, um, for getting into the office, they want to make sure they feel secure. And because there aren't as many people in the office, so they want to feel safe. So facial scanning could be a real game changer for people in enabling that to happen. That a lot of organizations are going to be taking a look at if they aren't already. Then there's the legislation. Don't need to talk about how much Brexit has had a huge impact from a legislative arena on a number of different industries and markets and hence organizations. And then, of course, its environment, not just the UN sustainability goals, but also our environment. How are we working? Do we have, if we're working in a hybrid or remote space, a dedicated workspace where we have a desk and the chair and all the things that we need to make it comfortable and effective? Or are we still doing it at the kitchen table or on the couch, which isn't really the best way for us? So the environment has a huge impact on all of that. The internal aspects is much more around what I call the organizational development arena. So taking a look at the culture. How is our culture going to help or hinder our change? Do we need to do something about the culture in order to, before we can actually embark on this change, in order to make sure that it's going to be conducive for what it is we're trying to do? Teams, do we have the capacity for people to actually do the change? Do we have the capability for them to do? And if not, do we then need to get people in and go recruitment? And recruitment takes a while. So, how does that timeline have an impact on what we're trying to do? Then it's looking at the systems, the processes, our technologies, policies. all of these different elements have an impact on our change. We need to look at what's going to help, what's going to hinder, what do we need to change, what do we need to adapt, what's actually going to, you know what, that's perfect. That's exactly what we need. We just need to promote it a bit more. So, taking a look at those internal and external influencing factors that may affect our change directly or indirectly really helps us understand the type of change we are dealing with. And that is the first most critical step when it comes to utilizing this model. Because if you get this wrong, unfortunately, you're going to be sent down the wrong rosy path. So, going through that analysis, really bottoming out what it is that we're really trying to do here is really quite critical. Now, the AB change model is made up from combining two actually very accepted theories out there. One is the Daniel Goleman leadership model. The other is Elizabeth Cantor's change skills. And I married them together through research based on the skills. So when it comes to the type of change, utilizing a lot of the definitions by Daniel Goleman, there's the radical change, there's the emergency change, but in my experience, those don't happen quite as often. It's more often it's about building consensus or healing discourse and using obtaining a high profile team and trying to enable them. Those are more often the changes because that's at the root cause of what it is that we're trying to do. We're trying to improve things is another big one as well, rather than just make it all radical. Oh, we're starting from scratch. Very few start from scratch. We just want to take what we've got and make it even better, is the most often. But really understanding that and going through that analysis really helps us define that. Because once we've got that, then the model does the rest for you. It says what leadership style you need to be demonstrating. It says what is the most important change skill you need to actually be demonstrating and focusing on. And then it has all the others in order of importance. Now, what I can guarantee without a shadow of a doubt is that if you focus 80% of your time on the least important skill rather than the most important skill, it's going to go horribly wrong. So, the other thing got to bear in mind is it's not a to-do list. Right, I've done that skill, tick, move on. Done this one, tick, move on. A lot of these will happen in tandem, but it's about where our focus needs to be. The other big question when it comes to the leadership styles is we also need to think about the so what. What does that mean to me? If I need to be demonstrating a coaching leadership style, for example, what does that mean to me? How do I know I'm doing it? How will others know I'm doing it? And that's something I've got to work out as a leader and build into the leading people side of the plans. The last thing you need to be looking at, the third step, is using the end person in mind approach. And what I mean by that, it's thinking about the person that's the furthest from the decision making room. What are they thinking? What are they feeling right now? And then what could they be thinking or feeling, perceiving about the change? Because if you can make that initial moment for them when they find out, discover, learn, gossip about the change positive, then there is a high probability that everyone in between will have a positive initial moment of the change, which is, as you guys will know, one of the first biggest hurdles when it comes to delivering change. Pulling all of those three different things together really builds the flexibility and the adaptability for leaders to actually deal with the uncertainty and the complexities that we are dealing with and are indicative now. So, just to really share with you a story about that, I was working with another organization on another digital transformation program. And we were told by the client that there was a big fear of technology in the workspace. So, we built the plans and everything based on that. But it wasn't really landing. And so I decided to go and observe a couple of their test sessions with it. And what I observed is that people were petrified to even turn the machine on. And that's when I realized there's not a fear of technology here. There's a phobia of technology. They didn't want to touch the new devices. And that got me thinking, I'm like, okay, how do you deal with that? Phobia. That's, psyche and all the rest of it. And I started to think, okay, what's your phobia, Jennifer? And not going into too much detail because it is a poltergeist moment, it is rats. And so I started to think, all right, in the client office, it was a huge new office, and it's about a block long, and all the meeting rooms and the spaces are glass and everything, and it's bright and it's light and all the rest of it. And where I worked, the team I worked with were down at one end of the building, and there was a meeting room there that was all glassed in. And I thought, if there was a rat in that meeting room, there is no way I would be on that floor, much less down, sitting near the team. And I thought, what would it take for me to get back into that space, sitting with the team with a rat in that meeting room? Long story short, a lot of time. And, but eventually, I would probably come down onto that floor, but on the other end. And then maybe eventually, over time, I might inch myself ever so slightly closer to that space. And I realized that's what we need to do for these people. We need to do that for them with the technology. So I was working with the IT team and found out that there was a support desk person in all of the offices, even if it wasn't full time, just a day or two a week. There was always somebody there every week from the IT support desk arena. So I thought, all right, can we make sure, first of all their desks are in a high traffic zone area so that when everybody goes in and out, has to go get a cup of tea, they pass by it. Easy peasy. Then it's like, let's get one of the new devices with a dummy account of the software onto all of their desks. And the idea was then that when someone came through, they'd look at that and go, oh, God, what's that? I'm just going to go over here for a few minutes. And then eventually they might go, Joe, what's that on your desk? Oh, it's the new machine. You want to take a look? Nope, nope, that's okay. That's fine. Nope, I got to go and do something. And they go off and do it. But eventually, long story short, they would start over time to get curious and start to ask more questions, maybe even ask Joe to show him around, maybe eventually even have a go himself. So the idea was that by the time it came for them being receiving the new devices and the technology being deployed to them, they were used to it. They were aware of it. They knew what it was that was coming down the line. They may have not fallen in love, but they were okay with it. And that's the big difference when it comes to actually utilizing all these different elements and really thinking about what's going on for them. So, to recap, the three things you need to do to build the resilience, that muscle within the organization and individuals, is the visioning, taking a look at what it is that you want to do. How do you want to do it? What do you want people to think, perceive, and feel about you? Not now, but in 10 years at least down the line. Two, use that holistic approach, looking at the internal and external influencing factors that will have an impact in some way on your organization, your people, and hence your change, followed by the AB change model within the actions and tasks that fall out of that. And then finally, the using the end person, end mind approach. Because if there's one thing that's certain, we are right now at the most certain and slowest moment of time and change. It's only going to get faster and more uncertain going forward. So we need our people to be ready and resilient, and our organizations to be future ready and fit. And to use the words of Vivian Green, which I think is quite nice in regards to rounding off resilience, it's that life isn't about waiting for storms to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. That was great. I love the rat analogy, by the way. I love that because you'd have thought that actually in some of the projects we've worked on, we would have a rat in the room. I bet some of our colleagues react, so that really made me chuckle. Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, I'm quite terrified actually when you listen to all of the, I guess, all of the events that we've been through over the last few years. Actually, when you sit and you think about it, it is phenomenal. I don't think we
Mm,
realize how easy things were prior to the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic in Ukraine and political situations. So yeah, it's a very different world.
mm,
So a question that I have for you is what do you think the biggest challenge? We've got so many challenges, but
mm.
from a leadership perspective, what do you think the biggest challenge is that we're facing right now?
I think the biggest challenge is that we're all facing, and leaders particularly, is time. There's so much going on. Everybody I'm speaking to, they're like, we're all running around like chickens with their heads cut off and doing loads and loads of things. But and the things we're just doing it because then it gets it done and we can just move on. But when it comes to change, and that's the same story with a couple of my clients there, and what I'm trying to advise them, we really need to do is we need to stop, just take a pause, and just breathe and plan this out, because we've all been on multiple journeys. I'm sure we've all done it at some point when we're like, oh, I'll just go down. I know that it's just off to get to that store or to get to my parents' house. I have to go down that road to get to it. And then something comes in and it doesn't go quite right. Or, oh, did I miss the turn, or where did I go? And what am I doing? And we get all turned around and all the rest of it. Whereas if we'd taken the moment to plan the journey, then becomes so much more smoothly. And it's not to say that things still don't go wrong, because let's face it, there are traffic jams, then there are accidents and floods and things like that. But it means that when they come down the line, we can sit there and say, okay, that's fine. I know where we're going, what we're doing. Based on that, we can then I'll just change the sat nav because I've planned it out. Say, right, avoid that route, and then it'll take me around a slightly different route from that standpoint. So I think the biggest challenge we've got is to resist the urge to just go and do, and instead take the time to do the analysis, have a think about what it is that we want, how we want it, and plan it out and plan the people side of it out. Because as I said before, a lot of people, we plan the projects and the training and the comms, but we don't plan the people aspects necessarily.
Thank you. No, very, very wise words. We definitely need to slow down, I think, or else we rush in and aren't quite sure that we've got all of the foundations in place. Um, Thank you.
No
Um,
worries.
I'm looking at the time now, and I think it's time to introduce the panel. So Jennifer, I know you
Okay.
panel, so don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to dive in and answer some questions along with the others. So
Hmm.
have we got? Is everyone there? Yeah, everyone is there from our lovely panel. So on our panel we have Neil. So Neil Harrison is a business change lead, and he's got over 20 years experience. Surely that's not true, Neil, in change leadership and transformation programs. We have the lovely Lou. Uh, Again, 20 years. I can't believe that, Lou. 7 years in change and transformation. We have Robin, our head of capability for people and culture. Get my words out. People and culture. So I'm sure we'll have some great culture questions for you, Robin, with 15 years experience in supporting behavioural and cultural changes in organisations. And last but not least, we have Talwyn, who is our Managing Director of Serendata, and the team behind the Insight Change Management Platform. So our change management platform that we are using to support our change programs. Okay, so I'm just wondering who we're going to pick on first. I want to look who looks the most terrified. I'm going to pick on you, Robin, if that's okay. Robin, how do you persuade senior leadership teams that culture matters in complex change and transformation?
A really interesting use of language. I think the word persuade is an interesting kind of thing. I think it's really, for me, I think the big thing is that as a leader, you're involved in the culture of the organization, whether you choose to be or not. So the question I suppose we need to ask is, are you comfortable at the moment with the way things are, or do you need to do something about it? And so that persuasion piece is something that kind of should automatically be something that leaders think about. Unfortunately, though, there's a bit of a gap, and between 86% of leaders actually think culture is critical to success, and then 51% of the employees think their culture needs to change. So there's a massive gap there where people perceive that culture is something that needs to be sorted, but not all the time does it actually get the focus that it actually needs. And I think the question needs to be asked is why should you even care? Well, the big thing about that, and the biggest persuasion point, is because your people want you to care about it. And I think that's the big thing around answering the question, because people really want leaders to care about not just them, but they care about the organization, care about what is actually going to be happening across all of that. Because at work, we're just not our jobs, are we? We're not our jobs. We kind of have all our hopes and fears and dreams and aspirations and challenges and all the experiences that we have, because we spend most of our time in work. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have with leaders around this, is because they have a huge part to play in that. It's not just culture is not, or culture within kind of complex transformation is not something that is done to them, because they need to feel invested. And as leaders, we all have that kind of responsibility or accountability to actually provide that level of kind of support. There's a really great quote that I really kind of love. It says, "A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and then shows the way." And I think that kind of actually really sums up for me how you can actually persuade. I don't like that word, persuade. Yeah, leaders, that they are a massive, important part of cultural change. There you go, Joe. Hope that helps.
Oh, and no one's contradicted you, which is really unusual in this group of jobs. No, absolutely. I think, and it is a crazy unknown world right now. So it's a real challenge for us all, I think, to get it right.
I think the thing is, Joe, there's some stuff that people. I'm a massive lover of books and reading all the great stuff, and you know, if you haven't read Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek, it's a really interesting book, because it talks about a leader being the last person that is actually going to be impacted, because they should be always thinking about being visible beacons. He calls them being visible beacons in all this. And if you haven't heard the story around Captain David Marquette, he's got a book called Turn the Ship Around. Now, I've been very fortunate to work for a client that does really big engineering stuff, nuclear submarines. Okay, and David Marquette's a captain in the US Navy. And one of the interesting things about his story is about how he changed the culture on a nuclear submarine from a permission culture to a culture of intent. Now, that in that environment, providing that level of psychological safety in one of the most toughest, most hierarchical working environments ever, is a really interesting story to read. So I would recommend anybody go and read that story. I've been very fortunate to hear him speak about it, but it's incredible about what he actually did in regards to changing that culture in that environment and being that leader in that environment.
Thanks, Robin. You're going to hate me, but I've got a question on culture, so I'm not going to go to the others.
I think Jennifer was just about to come in there as well.
Jennifer.
No, I was just wondering, Robin. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's really critical that leaders have that beacon, as you say, and really can show the way and walk the talk. But there's many times I find they don't always know where they want to go.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, how have you helped organizations figure that out from that standpoint and bottom that out?
Yeah, it's that's probably one of the things that is probably the most difficult thing to do. I think one of the things is that they kind of need to your point when you talked about vision or visioning. Yeah, one of the key things, how do you actually translate that into something that is tangible and authentic and
Mm,
actually can be used by leaders, because that's the most important thing. Leaders want to be able to actually articulate this in a way that makes it be authentic. And I think you need to think about, how do you actually create a story that is authentic, and then how do you visualize that story? Because we're all visual beings. Yeah, we've got two eyes, and we use them all the time. How do we actually visualize the story? And I think one of the things that we do at Sysdoc is use a process called visual dialogue. It's about actually creating that picture that enables a leader to actually then use that to talk about some of the things that are going to be happening. So instead of them just standing up in front of a big PowerPoint deck and talking about what that is, having a real tangible picture that you can actually walk people through is something that can be a really, really kind of powerful tool for them.
I agree with you 1,000% on that. Definitely.
Thank you. Apologies, Robin, I can't resist this question because I know it's going to be like a grenade. How do you shortcut culture?
Yeah, thanks for that one. And for people that do know me on this call, there is no shortcut. Okay, so and the biggest thing is that you can't put a timeline on it. Okay, there is no timeline for culture and behavioral change. Yes, you can see things, and you can start measuring certain things, so actionability, so you can see whether people are actually doing the things that you want them to do, because culture and behavior is about how you think, how you feel, and then how you behave. And those things are sometimes, if you can start putting tangible things around them, then you can actually start seeing it. But Joe, there is no shortcut. It is basically, I believe, and I think it's something that hopefully that everybody on the call believes, is that it is probably one of the most complex things that you will do with all of this, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with one of the most complex things in the world, which is a human being, and that is the difference. It's not a system, it's not a process. It's actually somebody that's got lots of emotional stuff that come with them as well, and also how they feel about what it is that's happening to them as well. And one of the things that leaders can do, going back to the leadership thing, is they need to be able to listen to some of that. They need to open the floodgates and actually hear some of that as well. And that's really important. But there is no timeline, Joe. There's no shortcuts.
Sorry, I couldn't resist it. I saw the question come in and I thought I couldn't resist asking you that one. Or where to go now? I'm going to let you off the hook, Robin, I think. And on the topic of people and culture and humans all being those wonderful creatures that we are, Neil, how do people typically respond to uncertainty?
Well, yeah, interesting. I mean, obviously, at one level, we're all very different, aren't we? I really liked actually Jennifer's introduction, where she said, it's not change, it's not rocket science. It's about people. So it's really about brain science, isn't it, Jennifer? So I mean, we think about people in terms of actually what's going on in their heads when we go through change. And I think, it's quite interesting. We can look to neuroscience for some lessons here. And I'm not a neuroscientist, by the way, but I find it fascinating. It is quite a young science. So I must admit, every time I read something, it sort of contradicts the book that went before. And it's kind of changing at quite a rapid pace. But I think there are some things we can draw from neuroscience and about the people side of change in particular. So obviously, in uncertain times, it's very hard to predict by its nature what's happening. And actually, what we can see through neuroscience is our brains are like prediction machines. If we can understand the environment we're operating in, and we can predict what's going to happen. We can predict certain situations, environments, and people. In the end, we're more likely to survive, and that's what's kept us alive, you know, for, well, since we stood up, you know, 2.5 million years ago or whatever. So, but being able to predict has obviously kept us alive. So our brains are geared around that. In uncertain times, of course, we can easily predict situations. So what's happening is our brains are going into overdrive a bit. We're seeking as much information as possible, and we're burning energy. And, you know, obviously over prolonged periods, that can lead to anxiety or stress or burnout, which is what we're hearing a lot about. Now, I guess one of the key functions of the brain itself is actually to manage our energy levels, to conserve energy as much as possible. So actually, brains burn about 20% of our body's energy. It's, you know, not that big. Well, mine isn't. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is conserve as much energy as possible. So that uncertainty, in that sense, isn't very helpful. But we tend to, you know, much of what we do, the majority of things that we're deciding, you know, our brains are deciding for us, is unconscious. So, you know, we're not really thinking when we brush our teeth. We don't have to think about that. We can even drive without thinking too much about it if it's a familiar route. And all these things are geared around building behaviors to save energy, right? Now, in uncertain times, we can't draw on those behaviors because we don't know how to act. And again, that means we're now having to think about complexity and think about ways in which to overcome the things that would have otherwise been easy. And that, again, burns energy, which, like I said, leads to anxiety and potentially burnout over prolonged periods. So that's not particularly helpful. And then I think the third thing is, in order to predict, an easy way to predict is to actually draw on our experiences, or actually the experiences of others. So storytelling, as Robin was saying, is so important to us because it helps to build, you know, our experience model of the world. It helps us to understand what we can draw on in order to do that prediction. So not being able to predict, in the case of a global pandemic where we haven't really got much to draw on in terms of, you know, modern reference points, again, that becomes quite difficult for us to deal with. So I think there are a few things we can do. So we can, as much as possible, provide information. So I think really important for leaders to communicate as much as they possibly can and not be afraid to say they don't know the answer. So that authentic, genuine, I don't know what the situation in front of us is going to bring, but, you know, let's be honest about that. It's really interesting. Actually, there's some research done that showed that people would rather know they have cancer than not know either way. Such is that sort of uncertainty. And now that's crazy, isn't it? In a logical sense, that's crazy. But that uncertainty really sort of drives us that hard. So being able to provide answers or to say, I don't know the answer, actually is more reassuring than what people are likely to make up in their own minds. So, you know, we will create a worst case scenario in the absence of information. I think there's also something about how we collaborate and work together. So actually, if we don't know the answers, let's set challenges for people to collaborate and be social together, because we like to be social and work with each other. That helps to reduce some of the anxiety. But that also empowers people to actually start thinking about, well, what might these solutions look like? And that empowerment, and that creates a sense of control. So in a world that's sort of, you know, beyond our comprehension and outside of our control, actually empowering people and setting tasks does create a sense of control for the individual, which helps in terms of being able to move forward. So yeah, and I guess finally, just experimenting and doing novel things. Again, we like we like experimenting and we like novelty, and those things help in terms of just removing some of that anxiety. Doing things that are going to motivate us is helpful as well.
Thank you, Neil. I think, yeah, it's hardly surprising, is it, when you look at all of the changes that are happening in around us that we're facing anxiety and burnout when you layer over the context of everything that everyone's going through. So I can't resist now. So we're going from all the nebulous uncertainty to the certainty. So I have to now go to Twoway. Because obviously data plays a massive part in change. And so T, how does data and tech support the kind of mad world that we're living in right now and change?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've been jumping around here thinking, oh, that's a really good point, that's a really good point, and I'm not going to remember all of them. But certainly, you know, from a change perspective, if you work in change or you work around change, you're capturing data. We've always captured data. We're trying to find validation points to create certainty and to kind of help try and guide us through, give us the information to make the best decisions. But what we're seeing, definitely, obviously, to reiterate a lot of points, is there's a lot more change going on. There's a lot more uncertainty. And where I mean, my perspective on this is I guess even in the current world, for businesses, very practically, we still operate a model where, you know, there's a project approach and there's kind of like a linear pathway, and you're kind of looking at the data in that area. But the reality of the world is it's always has been the uncertainty that catches you out generally. So it's that project that came flying in that you didn't know about, or it's the, you know, a sudden economic hit that you didn't, you know, see coming, and therefore, you know, the business is changing. And so moving forward, you know, data is going to be a critical factor, because it's about how you overlay data upon data upon data. So you start to create better understanding of the entire change going on in organizations. So rather than, like, you know, I think we have an opportunity to take data and start to move away from these kind of linear, this is a project, this is a deliverable, this is the change we have to make, this is the culture we're trying to achieve, you know, like tick box exercises, to create really like a view of the pathway we're on, and to like really tap into that change journey, rather than going, this is the project we're on, going, this is, where do we want to be? So tapping into that vision. And data supports that by not necessarily mapping out the vision, but providing you with all the points to say, are we on course? Where does this fit in? How does this fit into strategic objectives? What's going on to bring us to the strategic objectives? So it really gives us an opportunity to pull that up. And just the one thing I would say, and you know, I've worked in change for a long time, so this isn't me trying to insult anyone. Change management as a discipline is quite far behind in terms of how we capture data in terms of other areas, and that is because people are involved, and people are unpredictable, and they do things you don't expect, you know, so they are, you know, they're quite hard to codify. But I think, you know, where we really want to get to is that, you know, let's take some of the complexity out of that and go, okay, we are all trying to do the same things. We're trying to take people trying to take people from A to B. We know that there are impacts involved, and we know that there are actions that we're going to take. And if we can agree that that's kind of like the basic data set, we can absolutely move forward and remove some of that complexity. And I think that's where technology has a really important role.
Remove the complexity, remove the anxiety, which would be great. Thank you. Lou's not being asked a question yet. She's sitting there quietly and patiently.
If you haven't got time, it's fine.
Oh, we've got time. We got time. Lou, I'm really keen to hear what qualities you think that effective leadership has, because we've all got all of these challenges in the world, and change is hard. What does a leader need to be able to navigate this uncertainty?
Well, we've kind of been talking about it since the beginning of this webinar. You know, Jennifer, you really articulated it really well, you know, about, you know, communication and you know, that being, I suppose, being that conduit between the team and the projects, and actually that two-way that two-way communication aspect that a leader brings to us as change managers. Having worked with quite a few leaders and also been a leader of change as well, and been on the receiving end of it, and looking to my leader for help and support through change, it really is that reassurance. Somebody who can give you that reassurance that everything is going to be okay. And actually, if you've got problems, you've got somebody to talk to. So if you're a leader and you're of a team that are going to be going through change, the most important thing is to immerse yourself in the detail and get as involved as you can. Otherwise, you can't act on their behalf, escalating, and providing that support. It's also about sort of building some levels of respect as well between the project and and your team as well. So getting immersed into it means that you can sway things in your direction, maybe, and influence. It's that influencing, isn't it? And also when you get into the detail, you're able to disseminate change communication a bit better, I do feel. You're on it, you're more up to date.
I couldn't agree with you more, Louise. I think some leaders, they go away and hide, when it comes excuse me, when it comes to change. And what we actually need is the exact opposite. As you said, you need that active and visible leader, so that they're out there walking the talk, role modeling, encouraging, supporting. And I was reading a book that I had to review a few months ago on change, and the author had talked about how he felt that the leadership at the sponsorship level, that there is no active role for them, that they just make sure you've got what you need, and that's it. And I totally disagree with them 1,000%, and said no, we if you're, for example, running a marathon, and you've got your sponsor there at the side, you don't want just them sitting there being your cheerleader. You want to make sure you've got the water that you need, that if suddenly you fall down or you end up with a cramp, someone's there to help and sort and do, and as well as be the cheerleader, and at the end of it, that you've got the blanket on around you so you don't suddenly get chilled and your muscles seize up, and all of these things. You need them there, you need them active, you need them visible, in order to really enable the change, because people look to them. They look to the leaders of the organization to actually role model and see what it is that they're doing, and almost and justify in many ways what they should be doing, and how they should be doing it. Because if they don't, they're going, well, they're not doing it, so why should I?
I mean, being a leader is hard. Managing a team is hard, isn't it? And also, but it's not just managing down; it's managing up as well. It's extremely difficult. You know, when you sort of think about the amount of resistance as well that you come across as a leader, and it's not everyone's skill set, is it, to recognise resistant traits as well within their teams, and also be able to manage that. But it's an absolute fine art, I have to say.
I think
I've got a great linked question, and you can all sit there and hate me for this one, but it's a good question. How do you manage leaders and sponsors from over promising what the change will deliver for us? Has anyone had any experience of managing that kind of challenge?
I think
yes.
Yeah. Go on.
Should we say hands up? Hands up!
Hands
How
up,
many
hands
projects
up,
have been on that have overpromised? Is that okay?
I was gonna. There was a pause, and I was gonna say, whilst people are thinking about it, I just wanted to say something about the sponsorship thing, if that's right, just to follow up. So, for me, there's I completely agree about the active and visible sponsorship point, and part of that actually is not just about how we're sort of engaging sponsors for some of that strategic messaging and the sort of broadcast comms that so often happen, or wheeling a senior out in front of an audience at the start and, you know, reeling them off again, that kind of thing. But actually to have leaders that are engaging and listening and really trying to understand what people are actually going through, what it feels like to go through the change for them. And I think this gets to Lou's point about resistance. And I think some of the most powerful things actually leaders can do and sponsors can do in change is ask questions and really understand, test their own assumptions. Because, you know, particularly at board level, if you've been planning change, the particular change for months, you know, putting business cases together, some of those first comms are the first heard for people, and they're 6 months behind.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there is just something about that engagement and really listening to what people have to say. And then there's a load of people that want to answer your question just now, Chair.
Yeah,
So
but just to bottom that out, I mean, ProSci's even done all the stats, and they have come to the conclusion that the stats say that a active and visible sponsorship and leadership is the #1 success factor for change. You know, it just, if you've got it, you've got a high level of success. If you don't, different story.
I think it comes back down to that beacon, doesn't it? You know, they are the beacon, and it's not just about the person at the top, is it? You know, we're talking about leaders across the board. We're not just talking about the person that is the sponsor. We're talking about leadership within the whole of the organization, and actually how do they actually become a cohort that actually support this at whatever level they are and wherever they sit.
Yeah.
And actually, they need to get that information from that person, from who may be sponsoring. But actually, what do they do with that information themselves as leaders at that point? And that's a real skill as well.
I think if I can just jump in on the question that you asked, Joe, that because this all does actually link into, you know, what do you do if somebody overpromises on your project? We've all had it, right? But I think that there's a couple of points. First of all, you're probably not going to be able to stop that happening. So it's about how do you then kind of manage the, you know, as you do manage the kind of after effects of that. But everything we're talking about here is really about educating non-change professionals, or the people you want to step up in the kind of more the art and the science around change management. Because really what we want to see, surely all of us, is an education that, you know, people understand change is in business context is complicated. It's not complicated, you know, back to Jennifer's point about, you know, I want to change my life, I want a new house and I want a new car. None of that is hard. That doesn't, you know, well, I mean, it might be hard to get there, but it's not about, like, you're not the barrier going, I don't want to do it, right? So there are, you know, positive changes is kind of there. So it's about how do we get business leaders to think about positive change, but it's also about making sure they're brave enough for this journey, because actually they need to be able to say no, they need to be able to push back, they need to be able to say my people aren't ready, rather than we've just got a date in the diary for this to go live and we're going hell or high water, because the consequences of that are, in a business context, significant impacts on return on investment, you know, like kind of really tangible business reasons for projects not succeeding, and that's because of people and people not being ready. So it's a generally about educating, and that's a role that we really need to play, is bringing people, leaders, to a really good level of understanding around what change management actually does for their projects and their business.
I think you had somebody in the chat put something about, can you provide a practical example of how to support that? I think that's really the word practical is the thing, and then actually giving leaders the ability to actually practice and do stuff in a safe environment is great. You can't just shove them out there and off you go. I think we have a leaders of change program that kind of can help and support that, and I think some of the things that sit inside that are kind of some of the practical things that you'd want to see, really. So actually, you know, understanding what the role of a change leader is. So if I understand my role and my impact, I can practically go and actually have that conversation, or the kind of being able to actually understand kind of what to manage resistance and how to have critical conversations. It's really interesting, isn't it, about what a leader's there to do. They are also there to have conversations with other people and have those critical conversations that really matter. There's a thing called creative tension, which it's like a rubber band really, and if you put the tension in to the right level, you'll be able to actually have those conversations well, and understanding when to have the conversation and when not to have the conversation and what type of conversation to have is a practical way of being able to actually give people the ability to lead in that way. So
I agree. Oh,
sorry,
sorry,
go on,
go ahead.
Jennifer. Yeah, go for it.
I should say I agree with you. I think the other added element is about having a plan, a sponsorship and leadership plan. This is what I want you to do, when I want you to do it, why, and to whom, on that front. And, when I was working with this infrastructure company, we were, one of the things we're doing was creating a external event for their clients, and they wanted to get the leader, the project leader and program leader, wanted to actually invite all their clients across the globe to this event to demonstrate how digital they are and how, as a result, they were this unique factor within the industry. And so, in order to do that, we actually invoked the chairman and the MD of the organization to be the sponsorship and to send out those invites to the executive board. Say, look, go invite your key clients, and for them to come along to this event. And it took a big campaign from that standpoint, but it was very clear what we wanted these our two sponsors to do, when we wanted to do it, to whom. We crafted the message and say, right, and we need this to go out on this date. And we're going to need a reminder to go out on this date, and then a final reminder on this date. And oh, and by the way, we'd like you there.
Yeah.
To host. And that just gives them, then they know exactly what you want from them and what to do. And they're like, okay, fine, I can do that.
There was a really interesting, really quick story, really interesting example. And I watched a video where there was a session, and instead of actually picking the same people to come to the session, they chose another group of people who usually don't get to go to this type of leadership session. Yeah. Guess what all the leaders did at that point? They emailed the person that was saying, why aren't we invited? Yeah. And it was the first time that they'd actually got people who had never been engaged from a leadership perspective, feeling that they weren't involved in something that they needed to be involved with. And it comes back down to all this kind of neuroscience-y type stuff, doesn't it? About how you feel about it. Yeah. And how you feel you are. And it was really interesting. They chose a completely different group of people to get involved in this session, and didn't choose the usual leaders that actually usually do get involved in these sessions. And when they weren't involved, they wanted to be involved. Really interesting dynamic.
I think there's something as well around, and it's easier said than done, but it is quite a practical thing, and that is around actually creating a safe environment. So leaders that can create safe environments where it's okay to experiment and to learn from things that don't work. No, I'm not going to say failure, but learn from the things that they're experimenting with. Actually, and people knowing it's going to be okay to kind of experiment and learn and move on to the next thing. I mean, Jennifer, when you were talking about the phobia of technology, I mean, actually creating in that sense, creating an environment that it's okay to have a play. You're not going to break it, or if you do, that's a good lesson for us because we don't want it to break when it scales up. Those sorts of lessons are quite important. And I think, incumbent on leaders to set the tone and to set that safe environment that people can do that experimentation and learn.
Being really clear on the support bubble as well, that in providing that support bubble, where's responsibility and where does accountability sit within the change environment as well? Because again, going back to what role do I play in this and understanding it, but also where do I go to for support and the answers? What data can I have available to me to see whether or not my team are performing in the way that they need to throughout this change, and and what forums do I have to be able to escalate? And so all of that we need to wrap around all of our leaders of change, don't we?
We do. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can go to the poll. So we had this. I'm going to watch you wince as I ask the question. So for the uninitiated, change is only fluff. I just want to leave that hanging. What has been your experience in communicating better with stakeholders? Have you got any gems to share? Because I think we are in a different environment now than we were when we were all sat on site 5 years ago or 3 years ago. So things have changed, but I guess not fundamentally changed because we're still people. Have you got any gems to share? And we've got sort of 5 minutes to answer this before we wrap up. So it'd be great to hear your experiences with some real life examples.
So this is de-fluffing change. Is that basically the gist of the question?
Yeah.
Think of fluffy, and well, I think there's two things for me. The first is it's not rocket science; it's brain science. So we're talking about people, you know, actually physiology is a science, and there's stuff around that. But anyway, the thing for me, I think it's really interesting exercise is when you start thinking about the benefits you're trying to achieve. So, you know, if a board is considering whether change capability is worth investing in, and their key question around programs is typically, you know, cost versus benefit. Start looking at the benefits in terms of what do you need in order to achieve that outcome or that benefit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you need the technology in place. You need people using the technology and adopting it. You need the data to drive the solution or the systems. And you need the processes that are going to allow you to operate in a way that is sort of future fit. And actually, if you can draw then the link between the people angle of that to the benefit, I think it becomes a bit more compelling if you can show that traceability. I have a favorite saying about this, actually. So you don't get fit by buying an exercise bike, right? So, you know, I got an exercise bike sat in the loft room. I spent the money on a solution, but I don't have the motivation to use it. I'm not getting fit. And it's the same for technology. You're not technology solutions. You're not buying the technology. You're buying the benefit that it gives you.
My experience is building on what you've just shared with us, Neil. Is it's also very much around understanding the pain points. You know, what is it that's keeping leaders up at night, and then looking at how are we going to actually address that, and how is the change going to help in that space and get rid of those pain points from that standpoint. I was working for an organization last year, and they were doing, in this particular project, they were doing all kinds, I mean, you name it, loads of stuff. And I was brought on board to try and help them with their people plans. And I read all their documentation, and it was extensive. And I looked at it, and there was a lot of goals, there was a lot of objectives that I didn't know what it was they're trying to achieve. And so I asked them in that first meeting, I said, "What are you trying to do?" And they sat there and went, and I couldn't answer. And I went, before we even embark on the people plans, we need to be able to communicate with people what it is that we're trying to achieve here. And this was an infrastructure company, and I said there, you know, there's a big difference. If we're trying to tell people to get to Bristol versus Manchester. You know, and so we need to really set out what is it that we're trying to get to and why, and to go to your point, the benefits and what that attracts, and understanding the pain points for leaders and for people, and hence the attraction of making that happen. You know, if prior to the pandemic, I was traveling up and down to Glasgow with another client, and I really actually felt quite guilty about using the plane to get there. But the problem was, for me to go by train, it was going to take me an enormous amount of time. It was going to take 6 hours, 6.5 hours every time to go up and back. And I'm only there for barely 24 hours. And I'm like, so I'm spending so much time just traveling. And I just went, when I get on the plane, I get to the airport 30 minutes beforehand, get on the plane, 45 minutes later, I'm there, I'm out, I'm in the client's office. And I just went, if they could make a train faster, That would be so much beneficial. And it's about understanding those pain points so we can find the solutions and illustrate what that then means for them.
Can I, I was just going to talk about data a bit, because obviously defluffing things is often helped by a good dose of data. And I think traditionally, like, change has had an issue with it. It's not about data. There's lots of data. It's about whether it's objective or subjective data, and actually whether it is consistent, like across, one person's, it's a high impact or it's a low impact, can be very different. It's quite subjective. And I haven't got all the answers, but I think, when you think about data, we talk a lot at the moment about change saturation, about change fatigue, and repeatedly in conversation, people say, oh yeah, we've got like 30 projects going on, I get 40 emails a month because that's the comms, and I just put them in the bin. And I've heard that from tech companies who you wouldn't believe would be doing this exactly the same as every other organization. But really, I mean, if you can start to codify the data around change, you can start to identify, this is the amount of communications going out to this area of the business. This is the data on productivity that we've got. These are the change interventions that we're making. And you start to create this like holy trinity of data points where you can start to go, the question used to be, the statement used to be, there's too much change going on, which is fluffy, that's subjective, to going, there is this much activity happening, we're doing these interventions to try and minimize it, and the productivity is here. And there are some very, very tangible data points that I think we need to really lean into in the change community, because they're there to support us. And we just need to kind of put some thinking time around them to understand how we drive the best return for that.
And interestingly, Joe, I'll be very, very, very quick. I think one of the things that I said before was about how do you measure some of these things. And I think from Talman's perspective, having that ability to be able to use the data to measure how we're doing is massively important, because that's the tangible thing about it, is being able to actually demonstrate that what we're trying to do is actually making a difference. What degree of visibility? We talked about visibility today. Can people actually see other people demonstrating what we're wanting them to do? Can we actually objectively get people to demonstrate the desired behavior that we want them to have? We all talk about, and a lot of people talk about, when are we going to see the results? And it's really interesting, isn't it, that people want to see these things at pace. And we talked about, in a cultural perspective, when are we going to see it? Well, it's not as tangible as that in certain areas, but when we can actually do that. And then actually, what's the ease of implementation going to be? How are we going to support those teams and colleagues and leaders to actually demonstrate some of the things that we've been talking about today? And wrapping that all up within that kind of data space is massively important, because you can actually see it, touch it, feel it, instead of it being slightly a bit in the kind of air sometimes. So that's my bit.
Definitely, and I think that's been missing, hasn't it? So sorry, I couldn't resist using the fluff word to change managers and watching everybody wince. Because we've all had it leveled at us, but obviously we cannot succeed without people and change. So thank you. So I think we are almost done. We're 5:20. So Danny, I know Danny has the results of the poll, I believe. Are you going to share them with us, Danny?
The question was, where are you spending most of your time when leading change in today's uncertain world?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think
in the group.
Yeah, I think what's interesting for me, so when I saw the LinkedIn poll results, obviously in a way it's quite pleasing to see how many people are looking at that sort of people side, and really just acknowledging the important role of the human in our change approaches, which is really heartening. I think what we've seen through discussion today in particular is around the important role actually leadership and sponsorship have to play in order to enable the people and adoption. So actually I think that's credit to Jennifer and the other panel members for really sort of getting that message across, because I think that's quite an important point in terms of how we need to think about change moving forward, particularly around the leadership. What others think.
What I find fascinating there is how low in both instances strategic goals and benefits is. When we were talking earlier about, you said, you asked me what the biggest challenge I think it was, and I went, it's time, because people aren't taking the time to plan and actually look at what it is they're trying to do and then how they're going to do it and all the rest of it. I think that just, there's the proof.
And it comes,
Yeah, I was
comes,
gonna say the same thing actually. Sorry, mate. I was gonna say the same thing. It's because of the pandemic? Are we just not planning? Are we not planning ahead anymore? Are we not being strategic enough? I mean, are we now on the cusp of that? Are we going to see that happening now in the next 12 months, where everyone's going to start visioning again? Because I have to say I haven't seen that really recently.
Yeah, and I think you've just hit the nail on the head, and it's what Jennifer said in her presentation is around visioning. Yeah, I think we've all been reactive to it. We've been reacting to a global pandemic and trying to keep ourselves safe, keep ourselves kind of ticking over and running and doing stuff. Now people are starting to think again. Yeah, I know we were thinking, but we were thinking in a completely different frame. We're now having to come out and think, oh goodness, we were thinking about this, weren't we, before that? Let's start thinking about it again. And I think that it's interesting that it's so low, really low.
Yeah, and on top of that, it's it just really illustrates. I mean, I think that really illustrates the feeling that everybody's got, that they, because things have ramped up. Now that we're, I don't know, are we post-pandemic, or something, where we are on that at the end of the day. We're not in the same spot we were a year ago, certainly, much less 2 years ago, in this space. But because things have ramped up, because we are in this going back to normal phase, whatever that new normal is, we're trying to travel, we're trying to get back into the office as and when we can, we're trying to meet up with people and be on public transit and all this stuff. And as a result, I think we end up in a space where, as I said, we're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, just doing things, and rather than thinking, oh, am I going in the right direction before I go and do that? Am I going in the right way to get there?
Lisa says in the chat, hi Lisa, she's saying it depends on where a company is in their own change maturity and even project timelines. And I agree. Actually, most of us, at the tail end of something, not even starting something. So I'm interested to see what if anyone else wants to put something in the chat, to be honest, and what they think of these results. What they think it means.
It's funny, isn't it? Because people, to Lisa's point around change maturity, we sometimes don't really ask that question, or we don't or we don't understand enough about where the maturity is. And when you do actually find it out, it's incredibly important to understand how you can work within that environment then, because you may need to pull different levers because the maturity of the organization is different than what you were expecting. And I think and again, it does depend when you come in, and it does depend on where they are on their own journey as well.
Thank you. I think I'm just conscious of time, 27 minutes past the hour, and it's a lovely sunny evening. So I'll probably hand over to Neil, if that's okay, just to wrap and let everyone go and enjoy their Thursday night.
Well, thanks for the Jennifer and the panel members. I think, so for me, it's been quite interesting. The takeaways for me in terms of what Jennifer talked about, that sort of importance of setting that vision and have something to aim at, a holistic view, both internally and externally. Don't forget to lift your head, pause, check the environment you're operating within. And of course, have the person in mind as you progress through all this. And I think we saw and talked about, the impact uncertainty has on people. and the need to sort of take that into account in terms of the planning and direction, and how we use people to engage with them. We heard from Talwyn around data, how that can provide levels of assurance, but also save a lot of time on spreadsheets, which is valuable time we can apply to other things. Culture around, creating a safe environment, demonstrating behaviours, and no one's going to put a timeline to it. And the role overall, I think, that we've all sort of recognised, the critical role that leaders of change play in an uncertain world. Thank you very much to Jennifer and the panel members. Thank you very much to the participants or the audience and your questions. That was fantastic, and I hope you've got something from this session, as I'm sure I have. So thank you. And to Joe, of course, for moderating perfectly, and Danny for all the hard work in the background.
Thank you very much.